Hello, and welcome to Malmesbury's Virtual Carnival 2020. Thank you for joining us for this event, which we are certain you will find both informative and entertaining. We very much appreciate your support for Virtual Carnival, which is a first for all of us. We do hope that there will be other events in this year's programme that you want to be part of and enjoy. Malmesbury Carnival is still seeking to support our local charities, and although we are making no charge for any of this year's events, if you have not already done so, please consider donating this year. Now, sit back and enjoy the show, and thank you once again on behalf of our contributors and the Carnival Committee.
Start. The Linolite project, really, it was a museum initiative from as a spin-off from the Malmesbury Voices. The Museum Council asked me if I would concentrate, as I'd got a few interviews on Linolite, if I'd actually concentrate on that and see if I could build up the story. And so that took about 6 months last year from our initial meeting, where we got about 30, 40 people together, right through to the publication of the book in December. But the book is really only extracted from the recordings, and the full story is actually in the Malmesbury Voices collection in the museum. And what I'll be playing tonight are really just extracts from the extracts.
So just like to welcome everybody to the latest talk in Malmesbury's novel Virtual Carnival, the one-off, hopefully, this year. We may have to mix it up a bit with real and virtual next year, but who knows, we'll see how it goes. As always with these sort of talks, there'll be a couple of housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones muted through the talk so Bill's not distracted by phones, the TV, dogs and doorbells and things like that. There will be a chance for questions to be put to Bill at the end of the talk. He's happy to answer those. If in case of fire, please don't panic and make your way out of your nearest exit. I think you'll probably know the way out of your house better than I will, so I'll leave that on up to you. Let's hope that doesn't happen. I'm sure you're aware about this year's carnivals had to be different from previous years. No prizes for guessing why, of course. But one benefit, and there maybe aren't very many of those, is that the community that can join in has been expanded somewhat. We know that people have tuned in from New Zealand and Italy, and someone did Friday night's quiz from the middle of the field in Devon when they're on holiday. So it does have its benefits, but as I say, not very many. We can't get together and have a glass of wine or beer beforehand and afterwards and feed off each other for the talk. It must be difficult for Bill. Carnival is mostly about the community getting together, having a good time, as I say, but it's also about helping others by raising funds for local organisations, as I'm sure you're all aware, in schools, PTAs and so on, for young people and for the more mature, shall we say. We're not charging for these events this year, nor are we approaching businesses for sponsorship, as we'd normally do, as we know that for many times will be difficult. So what we're asking for is, though, that people, if they enjoy the talk, or even if they don't, I'm sure you will for this in this instance, is asking for donations through the PayPal Giving Fund. Of course, if you've donated already, then thank you very much. But if not, please do consider making a donation. All the details are on our website, one where you went to register for this event. Now, a couple of words about Bill Reid, our tonight's expert. Many of you will know him, but as well, or if not better than I do. But he's probably cursing me mentioning that he's a veteran of these Zoom talks, as he's done several for the museum already this year. I know, at least 4, I think. Is that right, Bill?
3 actually, just 3.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is a 4th. So.
Maybe another on the way. Yeah.
Okay. As I understand, Bill moved to Malmesbury in 1984 and has been keen on local history certainly since then. He's been a loyal supporter of Athelstan Museum and a prime mover in the Malmesbury Voices project. This evening's talk relates to Bill's research, as he was saying a minute ago, as an offshoot of that. That project and Bill's involvement has been recognised apparently by the British Association of Local History, who gave a personal achievement award to Bill, but typically his modesty says that it's really for the museum rather than him alone. So anyway, if everybody is sitting comfortably, should we get going? All yours, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Will. And can you confirm that you're seeing my shared screen, which should say Malmesbury Carnival on a white screen? I take it you can see my shared screen. So welcome to everybody this evening, and thank you for joining us. The talk I'm giving tonight, the presentation, is in association with Athelstan Museum, with extracts from the Malmesbury Voices collection, which I've been making for the museum for the past 5 years. And tonight it's Voices from Linolite. And I would like to welcome all the friends of the Carnival, all the friends of the museum who have joined us this evening, and particularly all what I would call the friends of Linolite, who've contributed to this project and whose voices you will hear in this presentation. The founder of Linolite was Alfred Butel, and his first patent was for the strip light, and that was in 1901. That was a carbon filament strip light, and I'll show you a picture of it later. There is actually an example of it in the museum, which you'll be able to see when the museum reopens. He moved his London factory to Malmesbury in 1941 because of the Blitz, and the factory stayed here until 1993, though that was on 2 sites. He first moved to the Bernavale site, and then a factory was built on Tetbury Hill for Linolite in 1985. Those premises are now owned by Dyson. And the full story, as far as I've been able to put it together, is available in this book, which you can get from the online shop in the museum. 3 people I'd like to mention right at the beginning. Peter Butel, the grandson of Alfred, the founder, who was a great contributor to the Voices project and the book. You will hear from him later on. I'd like to recognise also Sarah Pettigrew, who wrote a thesis on Linolite in the 1990s, shortly after it closed, which is incorporated in the book, and Barry Dent, who has done some research into Alfred Butel's story, and that's incorporated into the book too. I just asked Barry and Sarah to introduce themselves briefly. Sarah's a little bit faint, so I put the words on the screen, but here's Barry to start with.
Hello, Malmesbury Carnival. I'm Barry Dent, and I was privileged to work with Bill Reid on his book on Linolite for Athelstan Museum. Alfred Butel, Linolite's founder, was already in his 60s when he came to Malmesbury during World War II, and my contribution was the backstory of his distinguished career in the first half of the 20th century. I should like to thank Peter Butel, Alfred's grandson, for access to family papers that made it possible. Do enjoy.
I'm Malmesbury Carnival. I'm Sarah Pettigrew, and I wrote a thesis about Linolite. You can find the book Linolite, the Inside Story at Malmesbury Museum. Thank you.
So that's Barry and Sarah, and you'll be hearing directly from Peter later on. I'm going to start with a mystery sound. So anybody who worked down probably in the Bernavale site in the older days might recognise that sound. I shall show you what it is a little bit later on. When the factory moved to Malmesbury, it wasn't actually making the lighting fittings that it was known for. It was making these things. Alfred Butel had acquired a patent for hose clips, and he produced over 7 million of these things in the Malmesbury site over the war years, and they were used by aircraft, particularly who's supplying the Air Ministry to secure hoses for de-icing systems, fuel systems, hydraulics, and so on. A massive production of these over the years being stamped out, stamped out, stamped out, day after day. And two of the people who worked in the later war years in the factory in Malmesbury producing these hose clips were Doreen Austin and Rose Rice. Rose sadly died just a few months ago, but Doreen is still with us, and this is what they remember about it.
I liked it. I liked the feeling working together with others, didn't we? And we all were friends, weren't we?
Yeah, we were happy there.
Happy.
Yes.
The work, I mean, the presses, there were big presses to use for girls, really. And you had to cut out the metal for all these different things that we made. You worked, and if you did so many more, you got a bit of bonus.
At the time, we were making hose clips to go on bombers, weren't they?
Yeah, it was hard work, some of it, wasn't it?
Yes.
There was some huge machines that went to the roof of the dreadful noise, banging, really.
After the war, Linolite went back to its traditional activity, and one of the best known products was this light called a picture light, went over your picture in the dining room to illuminate it evenly. The SPL, the small picture light. And the diagram illustrates something I think really interesting about Alfred Beutel, which is that although he had invented the strip light, he was not primarily concerned by this point with the source of the light. He would source the lamps from companies like Thorn, Edison, Swan, Philips. What he was interested in was the nature of the illumination, even illumination over a surface. And you can see here there's a reflector and a cut-off shield carefully designed to disperse the light over the area of the painting or whatever's being illuminated. I'll show you an example of this a little bit later on. One of the people who worked in the factory was Babs Taylor, and she has this story about it.
We were very busy. We were a very busy company. We made light fittings for the royal family. We made them for Prince Charles when he got married to Princess Diana. We had just decided to remodel the new picture light, and we had the order come in that he wanted them like his mum's, and we happened to have some stored in the old scrap bin. So we got them out and we polished them all up and made the light fittings for him, and wardrobe lights as well. So everything was tickety-boo for the Royal Prince.
So that's one of the products. And another one was these edge-lit lights.
One of the more interesting products used the edge-lit principle. So you'd see these years ago in hotels and places like that. It would be an exit sign that looked like a piece of glass hanging from the box. But it was acrylic, and the edge of the glass was illuminated by probably a small fluorescent tube inside the box. And then anything etched on the surface, like the word exit, would glow, so you could see it.
This is groundbreaking stuff. You can see, and you might recognise that, which is a Design Council sticker. This was groundbreaking equipment that Linolite were designing.
This is a machine that we made at Linolite for many, many years, and it was for signature verification in the banking industry. The idea was that if you went into a bank and they gave you a new bank book, they would ask you to put a sample of your signature in the front on a piece of paper, and they would always pin it to your bank book, because what they were doing was putting your signature into your bank book without telling you. This was the machine that did it, and it's on standby now, and when you press the little switch there, what you get is ultraviolet light which actually, when you go in later, they check your signature that you've turned up with, that it really is you that owns that bank book. So it was a very successful fitting. At Linolite, our problem was making the pieces of paper, which are treated on the back with a chemical that was mixed up, and a great machine with a couple of pens that made the lines. We made the papers, and we got orders for the papers, and we got orders for the machine.
The extraordinary thing is that they were making the chemically treated paper as well. And I didn't know what this equipment was in the background until it was pointed out to me by June McElroy, but that's part of the equipment used for making the paper. And it looks to me now like a really Heath Robinson arrangement. But anyway, this is what they did. Somebody else who worked in assembly is June Purnell. She came from London, so you'll notice the difference in the accent. But here's one of the items that were made, many of them were made over the years. The skeleton strip light, model SK, it said, known colloquially as the Skelly, and they made them in all different sizes.
Well, assembling, making lights, little strip lights, and putting all the pieces together. First off, you had the pulley you all put together with a piece on the end that went into the little electric thing and joined that up. And you had to make so many of those a day. And then they passed on, and then they went into another place where they put the lids on, the shade. You kept doing that all the time, You had to concentrate and know what you were doing, but people did talk. We were all sat in lines along a bench, and passing it on sort of thing.
Now, here's Alfred Butel's original carbon filament lamp. That's the one he patented in 1901. And there is one of them in the museum for you to see when the museum reopens. But Butel himself, as I mentioned, was not as interested in the source of the light as in its diffusion. And there's a wonderful example here right across the street. Going to the porch of the Old Bell Hotel, there's a little notice in the porch which describes it as the oldest hotel. And you can see there's a light at the top of the frame. It illuminates this very well at the top, and then the light tails off down towards the bottom. Now, in the 1920s, Alfred Butel devised and patented a solution to this problem. And he called it the K-ray. Because of the K shape of the lines of reflection of the light. The lamp is still in the top of the frame. There's a flat back to the frame, but the glass front is ever so slightly curved. And that means that the light is reflected off it evenly to create even illumination all the way down. And that was used particularly for menu boards. The Lions cafes used them, for example. And there's an example here. That's the menu board for the Linolite 50th anniversary celebrations lunch in 1951. And where is that? That's the Old Bell Hotel in 1951. Of course, things have moved on a bit now, and there is a modern backlit screen outside the Old Bell, but inside the porch, that's the one I showed you first. I think that is such a clever idea, such a clever, simple patent. Now then, beginning of the day.
When we worked at Linolite, at the start of the morning, lunchtime, and the end of the day, there was a whistle, a hooter with sound. It's made of brass and copper. It's a cylinder. It stands about 2'6" high, and it's about 4 inches in diameter, with a lever on the side, and compressed air would be pushed into it. The lever would come down, and you'd have a sound bellowed out. Most of the people around Malmesbury could hear it down there.
Gary Warner kept this, and he's lent it to the museum for display. And just before lockdown, we were on the point of getting it see if we could get it to work again. My dream is to make Malmesbury hear that noise again, but unfortunately we were prevented from doing it, but I hope we will be able to get round it. And so people would come into the factory and they would clock in, and there's your mystery sound. Clocking in by putting your card in, selecting whether you're going in or out, and pushing the lever. And there's the extract from the card that people had for their clocking in and out times. And that's the machine itself. I discovered recently that there is another connection between Malmesbury and St. Mary Cray, where that machine was made, but that's another story. Now then, the hooter again went at the end of the day. And any of you who know Malmesbury well might recognise this as what is now Michael Thomas's shop on the Triangle. Used to belong to the Pratt family.
At going home time, when the whistle blew, all the ladies came out of the factory, had a rate of knots, wanted to get home for their tea. And in those days, Dad had the wet fish he was selling in the shop. And in those days, a lot of the ladies would buy fish and take home for their husband's tea. Mother and father worked the business together, but Dad did country rounds with a van going around the local farms. So very often, Mother was the only one in the shop to do the serving, hence the queues of these ladies wanting their fish building up because Mum couldn't serve them fast enough.
So the life of Linolite had an effect on the life of the town, and it had quite a big effect on the life of the town. But the first site is hardly recognisable now. There is a blue plaque. You can see it if you look down from King's Wall, though often there are cars parked in front of it, but it does identify the site of the Poston Mill, which is an old industrial site of Malmesbury, the Luce's Brewery, and it simply says the last users of the site were Linolite, the buildings being taken down in the mid-1980s. And that is where the Maltings estate is now built. So if you go down under the mirror, down the steps, that's the view you get of the Maltings estate. But that's not what it used to look like, of course. So here's a little bit of time travel to show you it when Linolite was in action. So to the right is the old Poston Mill building, and ahead of you, the Luce's Brewery building. But you recognise that the steps and even the fencing going down to the steps from King's Wall, they haven't changed at all. So what was it like down there?
On the left was the metal shop, and that was the brazing shop. Then in years to come, that was the assembly built down there. Yes, you went across the river, because it went underneath, and like the river come out in what was, it wasn't a car park, but it was sort of a car park. And the bridge there, you went over, it wasn't very wide, and it was like tin, metal, and when you walked on it, you would think, oh dear. Yeah, it was quite an experience, but it was lovely to work there.
So you can see where the River Avon went under the mill there, under the wheelhouse. This photograph, I think is a wonderful photograph, and I hope you've got a big enough screen to be able to see it clearly. Taken in, I think, 1961, just after the new Linolite office block was built. So here's the assembly that June just referred to. That's a newer building as well. And you can see the river coming through here, the old mill wheelhouse, and the river under the road there, and then coming out and running down here. Now this part was all later piped and built over, and you'll see in a later photograph that there was actually a building put on there as well. If you look very closely at Burnivale, you can see a truck coming down. because everything had to get in and out by Burnivale. And I'll come to that story in a minute. So here's the old Poston Mill, the wheelhouse, the old Lucer's Brewery. And a close look at this is quite rewarding, because it shows a lot of very neat back gardens, a lot of them, I think, put down to cultivating vegetables. So even in the 60s, people were growing a lot of their own crops. So here's the entrance as it is now to the Maltings estate, just coming a little bit closer up to the wall as it is now. That's in preparation for another bit of time travel, which is to take us back to 1947. The assembled staff of Linolite in June 1947, with Alfred Butel in the centre. On his right, his son Victor. We'll come to him in a minute. Other senior managers of the company: Simon the Marischal, Cecil Gregory, Alfred's wife, Wally Brunton, Stan Whitesell, and Rose Rice and Doreen Austin, who we heard before and who you're going to hear again.
And we had our own little canteen, didn't we?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes.
Yes, it was a little place.
It was a little place. The lady in the canteen, Mrs. Lyles, was so lovely to us all, wasn't she?
Yes.
And we had lovely food, didn't we?
Yeah, it was wartime and, rationing.
Yeah.
And we always got fed.
Yeah, we did. We always had a lovely meal.
Yes, she used to bring lots of garden produce, and she used to struggle along on her bike with this garden produce. From Charlton.
Well, we all sort of looked up to her, really, because she was an older lady.
When I was 15, I went to work at Linolite straight from school as a telephonist. Worked on the switchboard. Came down underneath the mirror, down the back steps there, and there was a little building. Underneath was the switchboard and a receptionist. And then there were some stairs at the back of the room that went up to Mr. Victor's office. He was revered by everybody. We would all see him coming down the steps, bounding down the steps or driving along the drive in the mornings, and everybody go, Mr. Victor's coming, Mr. Victor's coming. And we'd all heads down. But in actual fact, very nice people to work for. Very often I would be sent up to Mr. Alfred. He lived in a house opposite the hospital, the old hospital there in those days, with papers to be signed. My first wage, I remember, was £1.12 and I think I was earning about £5 when I left. I'd been promoted from telephonist to invoice typist. And I remember Kathleen Seddon was Mr. Victor's secretary at the time. And we were sent up to London. I felt so proud because we were sent up to London to buy my first proper invoice typewriter. It had all the things on the back where they threaded the invoices through. And I remember being so proud being sent up to London to buy that.
So here's a view from the river slightly later on, and very kindly annotated for me by Brian Dyke. And you can see it is a real complete factory complex. It goes right through from design to assembly and dispatch, including paint shop and tool room and stores and everything else needed for a factory, like the reception and so on. It was a complete complex down there. And this building here, once the river was piped underneath, was built for the contracts that Linolite established with the Ministry of Defence. And they did a lot of very specialised work for the Ministry of Defence, which you'll see some examples from in a minute. The tool room was to the left of what you were seeing. So here's the 1961 office block, and the tool room was here.
I worked on model making. We used to have a design department, and we would turn their concept drawings into a 3D image of what they thought the light was going to look like. The design team then would break it down and do proper drawings. And the tour room, we would make the tools that would produce this. Then we used to have our own moulding shop for the moulding machines. We had our own press shop, so we would make the moulded components or the metal components. That would go on then to be sprayed, and then it would go to the assembly shop where the women would put the lights together, tested, packed, and off they would go. So yeah, I was quite fortunate. I really enjoyed my time there because I got involved from some like a thumbnail sketch of what they thought the product was going to look like to the actual light itself.
So here's a photograph of the assembly, I think in the 1970s.
When I was old enough, I did work in Linolite. I worked in Linolite when it was down Burnaville. That was interesting down there. There was quite a few of us. What I actually did, I started off doing the assembly, and then because I was a bit enthusiastic, I suppose, I was asked to go in different places. So I went around doing different things when people weren't in. So I would be in the workshop, then I was over in the paint spray shop. Then after that I went to inspection, and then I went to help actually braze the lights to put them together. And of course, lunchtimes, I mean, you didn't really have time to do much, so half the time we just sort of went up onto Daniel's Well and had our sandwiches and sat up there when it was nice.
How did you get to work?
There was actually a van that came to pick us up then. So it came up to Norton, and then I would go there, and then it'd go on to Thurston and then back to Malmesbury. But the atmosphere was sort of, everyone seemed to be happy and mucking in, and everyone clocked in, and away we went. And you got on with what you had to do, really.
Now, everything that came down to the factory as supplies and went out from the factory as finished products had to get through Burnaville. It was the only way in and out. And in the 1970s, up until the 1970s, there was a house on the corner there, which is no longer there. If you walk down Bristol Street, you'll see the numbers go from number 2 to number 6. Number 4 has disappeared. But while that was there, the trucks had to get up and down, and it was a major problem.
We used to have to come to the top of Burnaville and with jacks and jack the lorries over when they used to get stuck between the wall and the house, which is now demolished. My understanding is that the house was actually purchased by Linolite and donated to the council for the council to knock down.
Our own vehicles had to get out of Burnaville and then back in at the end of a journey. Also, we had suppliers' vehicles coming in, some of which were larger than ours, and quite often it caused a bit of confusion and roadblocks in Burnaville. Also, the bigger lorries used to quite regularly take the guttering off one of the houses in Burnaville. So our maintenance department used to keep a stock of spare guttering pipes and tiles so they could go along and repair the houses as and when necessary. On one particular occasion, I recall that we had a loaded articulated lorry trying to get down to us, and at the same time there was a rigid lorry, again, that had been supplying to us, trying to get out, and they met halfway along Burnaville, and that caused one heck of a jam. I think the Arctic eventually managed to back out onto Bristol Street, but that itself was quite a feat and took a long time. So there were a lot of people late home that day. That resulted in us creating an emergency exit, which came out at the back end of our premises and led up past the end of the recreation ground up onto King's Wall. So we could get cars and smaller vehicles, perhaps our own minibus, out through that entrance on such an occasion.
But they did somehow manage to back these articulated trucks down when the factory finally moved out in 1985. And that's an Arctic right down at the bottom where the entrance to the maltings is now. So somehow they managed that. Oh, now this story is still live, I'm very pleased to say, because since I started collecting material, I've been contacted by several people who are related to people who used to work in the factory. And I was sent this photograph very kindly a few weeks ago by Emily Taylor, who is Stan Whitesoul's granddaughter. Stan Whitesoul was for many years the technical director of Linolite, and she sent me this picture, which I'm showing for those in Malmesbury who might remember some of these people. Stan Whitesoul, Cecil Gregory, Mr. Rain in purchasing, Wally Brunton, who used to live on Gloucester Street, Fred Duke, who was the company secretary, and Les Fickling in sales. And I'm going to come to, I think now, yes, this is the 1971 Jubilee, the 70 years of Linolite in 1971. And this is what Peter Butel, Alfred's grandson, told us about it.
The 1971 70th anniversary Jubilee gave Linolite, and Dad felt it was very important, it gave us an opportunity to really bang the drum, to draw attention to us and also support the sales and export agents. I don't remember how much it cost, but I do remember Dad talking about how much it would cost. Was it going to be worth the huge expense? But I'm sure it was, because we basically had nearly a whole week in which the marquee and the exhibition were used to show off Linolite and its products to a wide range of people, initially from the trade, but also our sales agents from abroad. The marquee was split into two. There was the exhibition, of which there were all the photographs, and then behind that, which was not obvious to people necessarily attending the exhibition, was an area as large again, which was used on the Friday of the week for the lunch. And that was really a celebration, not only with the most senior and closest of our contacts and staff, but also for members of the family, some of them elderly, who had seen a lot of this going on. So it was both a business and a family celebration.
And those two huge marquees were set up beside the factory down by the river. And they only just escaped flooding at the end of the exhibition.
The Jubilee actually was in two parts from my point of view. The first one when we floodlit the tower and the abbey in the town, and of course the dower house that belonged to Victor Butel. I also wired all the marquees. There was two marquees on the lawn. One was for the display of all the units and lighting, and the second was for the catering.
And here's Les Fickling again with agents from Spain, because they invited all their agents from all over the world to come to this event. And Les Fickling himself, that story is also live, because I've recently been in touch. I was contacted by his son, Roger, who sent me some information. And he also has just sent me today this photograph, which is Les's retirement in 1972 or 73. Les was responsible. He was the driving force behind all the international sales through the 1950s and the 1960s. And I think that's a wonderful photograph. The sincerity of Victor Butel's look towards him is quite striking, and the quality of the photograph suggests it was taken by Peter Harding of Tetbury, who did a lot of photographs for Linolite and was a family friend of the Butels. Because by now it's Victor Butel who's in charge of the factory. Alfred died in 1965. Another of the things they made, described by Brian Dyke, is the lighting for pub signs, outdoor lighting.
We also did a huge, great big weatherproof downlighter called a WD. And this was a large metal housing with a hinged glass frame front to change the lamps. That later on got changed into an FWD, which was fluorescent weatherproof fitting, which was a lot smaller, slimmer. It had a sliding perspex shade, and it was coated in the rubbery substance. And most famously, I suppose, it was used for pub signs. So we did a single and a double one for that.
Beautiful photograph. I couldn't resist putting it in, of Brian and Leonie, who met at Linolite and who now live down on the south coast near Chichester, oddly enough, in a village called Elmer.
John Horrigan turned up with a chap from the Royal Navy, and they decided that the work that we were doing, mainly in the assembly side, was good enough to earn a naval contract in manufacturing Navy lights. This would be below deck lighting for ships, Royal Navy. After a while, the Navy guy came up to our office and had a chat to us and suggested to Stan Whitesell that perhaps we would like to do design work. And so we won a design contract. When you did the design, of course, you had to design the fitting in conjunction with the MOD, of course. We would then go and make a prototype. They would then approve it, and then it would have to go for shock and vibration test, which was a big eye-opener to me when the first time we ever went to have a look to see what that involved. On the shock test, you had a large metal table. It's a huge big table with holes all over it, of course. You would then strap the fitting to the table, a complete fitting with shade and everything on it, lamps in it. And this ram would then come up from underneath and wallop the metal table. As I was told, the force that it came up to was the equivalent of the old battleship firing a broadside. The shock to my system was when I took some of our fittings and tried them on there, I came back with a carrier bag full of bits. But we got over that.
Well, they did get over it, and for many years they produced equipment, light fittings for the Royal Navy, and I was actually shown one, lent by Dick Stanger, one of their units, and it says here, shock tested at 70G in all three directions. Now, I had to look this up. Fighter pilots are trained up to something like 8 or 9G. 70G is enough to kill you outright. So that's the sort of shock they had to resist. Brian Dyke again. Brian Dyke, I think, was really one of the big characters of Linolite, and took part in all sorts of activities, and still shows a great interest in it, and has been very helpful to me in compiling material. Here he is in a carnival float for Coronation Street, which was put on by Linolite, and it's typical of Linolite. They took part in the carnival, and oddly enough, they're taking part in the carnival again today. Oh, now here's another event.
The famous Linolite raft race. One or two people in their wisdom decided, right, we'll get some oil drums, we'll get some pallets, we'll make some paddles, and we'll have a little raft race around the mill down at the Maltons. Everything was going swimmingly, great day, and all of a sudden, I was coming to a jetty that they'd made out of pallets and odd timber, and I was about to get off the front of the raft, and not being a great swimmer, I was quite happy to get there as quick as possible, but unfortunately, somebody on the back of the raft decided to jump off onto the bank, and up went the raft, and I fell in the edge of the river. What my foot landed on, I haven't got a clue. But the next minute, I dragged myself up the bank with half my foot open, blood everywhere. Ambulance arrives. I end up going to Swindon Hospital, and that was the end of the raft race for me. But luckily, one of the girls there was a first aider and wrapped my foot up with her shirt, and it was still an enjoyable day. But whether it was a piece of metal or glass or whatever it was, but it was quite severe. But it was thoroughly enjoyable.
That's okay, health and safety maybe, but it's Linolite as a community in itself and as part of the Malmesbury community. So moving on, 75 years, that makes it 1976. And there was another celebration with an open day. And by then, of course, Alfred Beutel had died in 1965. By then, it was still Victor Beutel who was in charge, but his son, Peter, was then training and preparing to join the company. And he was by then in his early 20s. Here's Trevor Hicks remembering the open day.
Yeah, just looking at one of the old Linolite 75 years anniversary, one of the Jubilee. Yeah, I got a picture of myself on the back of there actually, which just shows when people were coming around into the plastic shop. It was an ultrasonic machine which used to go around on a carousel and make up the lamp holders for a new development we were doing. Yeah, quite interesting. These all people from the town were invited down for the evening sort of session, really. And a lot of people from the works actually stayed behind and had a look at other departments where they haven't really been into. So, yeah, a really good day.
Another example of how the factory was open and looking towards the town as a community. Now, time moves on in the 1970s. Victor Beutel is still in charge, but by 1978, he's not in very good health. And Peter has joined the company. And at the time, Norman Peters is the managing director. He was a retired bank manager from Malmesbury, joined them as managing director. And Dr. John Paxton was the deputy chair. And John Paxton is a story in himself, really, very interesting chap. He was very interested in what he called, and he invented the term, industrial archaeology. And so I feel something a little bit in common with him. There were discussions about selling the company, and two approaches had been made by a company called Rotaflex. And the first one was turned down, but Rotaflex then came back with a new offer.
And when Rotaflex came back the second time, we obviously had long conversations about it, particularly John Paxton and myself, because Dad was sort of umming and ahhing about it. We were worried that his health hadn't got any better. He didn't appear to be able to let go. You know, he always wanted to know what was going on, was very interested. And I think part of it was, I assume we had net positive assets, but I don't think it was particularly strong, put it that way. So we were concerned for his health going forwards. So in 79, he would have been 64. John Paxton and I were concerned about his lifespan if he didn't let go. But I remember having that conversation with John and saying, maybe for the good of his health, we should sell it. And so the process of the negotiations with Michael Fry and his managing director, David Capron, and with the help of Morgan Grenfell, we came to an agreement. And it went through in early January 79.
And so the chair of Rotaflex was Dr. Michael Fry, was awarded a CBE for services to industry, a big chap in all sorts of ways and a big character. And you'll see a little bit later on why I think the Beutels must have liked him. But he was a really interesting chap. And so he took then Linolite on to the next stage. Though it was still based down at Berneval, and the old guard, as it were, was still there. Stan Whitesell, who'd come down from London, I think, with Alfred Beutel originally, was still technical director. And here he is at another exhibition with Luis Simont, who we saw earlier, agent from Spain. Now, Stanley, however, was approaching retirement, and I was very kindly sent this photograph by his granddaughter, Emily Taylor, of him making a speech on the occasion of his retirement. So this must be, I think, 1984, outside the management office, the office building at Berneval, making his farewell speech. And he's remembered by Graham Shute.
Graham, you were taken on by Stan Whitesell at Linolite, I think. I joined as a design draftsman shortly after I joined. One of the projects that I was given, it was a slightly larger skeleton strip, pre-anodized aluminium with something called the isolating lamp holder. And so I got a little bit stuck at one point and needed to talk to Stan, needed some advice, but being quite young and in awe of the technical director, I was a little bit hesitant to want to go to his office, but I plucked up the courage and banged on the door and walked in and sat down in front of him. And I think I must have been shaking, the drawing, the paper must have been going all over the place. And he said to me, "How can I help, Graham?" And I said, "Well, I've got an issue and I really don't know quite how to solve it. I've looked at this, but they don't seem to work. And I'm not sure as I can find a solution." And he looked at my drawings and we spoke about the problems that I was coming across. And it was a very good meeting. And I walked away feeling quite happy. And I was quite pleased because he said to me, "Graham, I'm very, very happy," he said, "for you to walk in my office and talk to me about anything. But one thing I will ask you is, if you come in with a problem, I need to know what you've tried to do to try and resolve it. So for all the negative, I need the positive parts," he said, "and then we can work from it." He said, "I don't want you to come in and say, I can't do this and sit and wait for me to give you an answer, because there is no answer to that, because I need to know what you've done." So it was a good bit of advice that stayed with me for the rest of my life.
Photograph of the same occasion seen from the river side. Really lovely picture, I think, that shows the old buildings there. The MOD on the right, the prefabricated buildings, the brewery behind, and the postern mill on the left. And in the background, a blue van, which I believe is the van used by Stuart Lazenbury. So we'll come to that in a minute. So now we come to 1985, which is the time of the move. Rotaflex under Michael Fry decided to build a whole new factory. They called it the Purpose-Built Factory up on Tetbury Hill. And this photograph was taken just before the move away from Burnivale up to Tetbury Hill. Michael Fry there in the centre, very big chap. He was chauffeur driven everywhere. His chauffeur's actually on the photograph at the extreme top right, a chap called Fred. So there's the staff in 1985, just before the move. And they moved up here. I'm sorry it's not a very good picture, but it's quite atmospheric. That's how it looked at the time, 1985. And Trevor Hicks was very, very involved in that move.
I suppose it was about 18 months prior to the main factory move, which was in 1985. I spent most of the week at Tetbury Hill, along with other contractors supplying and building the mezzanine floors in the stores area and positioning new assembly lines and conveyor systems. I had a 21 scale layout of each department, showing each and every machine cut out and coloured card and pinned in position. Staff from each department were asked to come up to the site. I would show them around and then show them the proposed layout. After a few sort of movements of machines, cutouts, with their involvement, the final details was agreed. Areas included the tool room, metal shop, paint shop, plastic shop, stores, dispatch and assembly. Everyone was very interested, sort of all the way along really, where they were and where their position would be and all the rest of it. But once you showed them around the site, sort of people sort of like had a fair involvement, and I mean that was staff, from the people who worked on the shop floor to the supervisors to everybody. Everybody came up and had a look around. So yeah, I think everyone was very interested when we actually did move up.
But you can see an entirely different environment from the atmosphere and the design of the Burnivale site. And here's the opening day.
Do you remember the opening day when Linolite moved?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, this was back in 1985, where Michael Fry, the chairman of the Rotaflex Group, opened a bottle of champagne. So we were all outside and he was fizzing up in the air, sort of thing. It was quite a wet day out, if I remember rightly. But all the work sort of turned out. And as I said, there is a £2 million factory opened up.
You must have felt very proud at the time.
Oh yeah, I think we all were really. We were all really looking forward to the sort of future. Brand new building, you know, nice and warm, completely different from down at the old Burnaville site where people had little heaters down by their feet, and some of the operators actually kept their coats on all day where it's got so cold, certainly in the winter, but this site was absolutely fantastic.
So here's what I think must be a very, having spoken to his son, I was privileged and lucky to have a telephone call with Michael Fry's son, and he recognised that this is absolutely characteristic of his father, who was a big chap, very businesslike, but also very humane, and had some very interesting ideas about management, which he put into a book called The Mystic Manager. This is not available as a book, but it is available online on Kindle as a digital book. Mystic Manager, A Call for Change. And he, in the book, if you're interested in alternative management methods, he draws on Eastern philosophies such as Buddhism and Sufism to translate them into ways of making companies work better, and particularly with a very humane approach. And I think that's what appealed to the Butells. Norman Peters then retired as managing director, and Peter Sear took over. But it was only for a very short time, a few years, as he sadly died prematurely, and June Purnell is somebody who remembers him.
And Peter Sear, he was a wonderful boss. I've never forgotten him. I haven't forgotten because when he became ill, when he had to go into Oxford, and I met him, we was in the hallway somewhere, and he said, I said, "You all right?" He said, I'm terrified, June." I said, "Why?" He said, "I woke up in a nightmare. I was on the floor. Someone was kneeling on my chest and they were sawing my chest open." He said, "And I was so frightened." I said, "Look," I said, "you've got the chance to be put right, which my kid never ever did." I said, "So don't worry about it." So when he had it up, they said, he'd got his operation done, and we all sent cards. And then a few days later, someone came in to get us all together and told us he'd passed away. And it devastated me. It devastated because I think, God, it's me telling him he was going to be fine. But that's the sort of man he was. He was lovely. I think he was greatly missed.
So, very poignant story, I think, but something also characteristic of Linolite. This is a factory shop floor worker talking to the managing director. And one of the things that Peter Sear did for a time, I don't know how long, was organise these Keep Fit sessions outside the Linolite works. He died, and his role as managing director was taken over by Mike Wood. Now, Mike Wood had been appointed technical director when Stanley Whitesell retired. So he then moved into the managing director's office. And one of the things that he did was to introduce a scheme which was called the Outwork scheme. And this was in order to keep costs down by actually farming out some of the simpler assembly jobs for people to do in their homes. And this was organised by Stuart Lazenbury.
1987, the company appointed me to run an Outwork scheme where I was delivering orders to ladies in different areas: Malmesbury, Lee, Corston, Chippenham, Foxley, Shurston, Sutton Bender, Oaksey, Harlavington, Milbourne, and we had some operators who wanted to do the Outwork so bad that they were coming from Calne, picking up the orders, taking them back home, making up the orders, and then bringing them back on completion. And it was a really big thing for the company because we had 61 operators from around these areas. What I used to do was pick the orders, different fittings that the company produced, deliver them to the homes, and when the order was completed, the operator got paid. So if they got the order back within a few days, I was ready. They'd phone in, they'd all phone in and let me know how they were doing. And I'd pick up the orders complete or part orders if they couldn't complete the order. Whenever they finished the order, they got paid. So if it took them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, they knew that they didn't get paid until it was complete.
And Stuart kept his absolute meticulous ledger, and that's him showing his ledger of the deliveries and the collections that he made over those years. Another of the fittings that was made in those years are the Giotto series, and a lot of Malmesbury people might recognise those.
The Lumions products was mainly the Giotto range, which would house all the new compact fluorescent lamps available at the time. We had a lot of discussions with Thorn, who were manufacturers of one of the most revolutionary lamps in that era, the 2D lamp. We were really starting to produce very compact fittings, which created our own issues with temperatures. Being a fluorescent lamp, they do give off a lot of heat. So we were using quite advanced materials in the mouldings to ensure we were able to sustain the life of the product over a long period of time and stay within the temperature ranges of those materials. Giotto, there was a whole series of products from that, Circo ones, circular ones, Quattro square ones.
So those were good years, the mid-1980s. But then Rotaflex had two offers to buy Rotaflex, and Michael Fry turned down the first one, but he did accept the second one, which was from GTE in America. And then things began to change quite rapidly. Even though the factory was in reasonably good shape, it was now in a group eventually which did not have its interests at heart as the previous owners, the Butels and Rotaflex, had. And eventually it was sold to there was a management buy-in, and the Linolite site itself was closed.
You've got a copy in your scrapbook, Trevor, of rather a sad day, which is the closure of Linolite. Yeah, the picture tells the story, really. Set to close, a £2 million factory at Fylands is to shut with a loss of 93 jobs. I'm not too sure if it worked out quite like that, because I think most of the people were quite lucky to find other employment. But yeah, a sad day for us all. The day come when you handed back your car and your keys, and other people came out to make sure it was in the condition that they expected it to be in. And I think at the end of the day, it was relief. And we knew ourselves that we were going on to hopefully create our own lighting company. And so, yeah, that's what we look forward to.
When the factory closed, Mike Wood was managing director. He had the sad job of telling people that they were losing their jobs, and some people blamed him for it, but it was nothing to do with him. Obviously, it was done by his bosses. Everybody was laid off and made redundant, and then there was a team of 6 or 8 were kept on to make sure that the factory was empty when the door was locked. And I was one of the team kept on, and my job was to make sure that all the fixtures and fittings were found a new home. And the 2 sister plants, they had their picks first, and that was all delivered to their factories. And then I had the job of getting rid of everything else. One of the starting points was seeing if any of the local schools wanted things like tables and chairs and things like that. So we got rid of a bit of it. A lot of it was sold to anybody that wanted it. A lot went through the auction house, Hilditch. And when the crunch came, the only thing that we couldn't get rid of was a one metal cabinet that went in the skip. But otherwise, everything that was worth anything was sold off, which I was really pleased about. But halfway through the process, Mike came up to me and he said, I'm not going to do this again. I don't like making people redundant, so I'm going to start my own company. They said, but what's more, you're going to come and work for me. Am I? I said. He said, yes, you are. So that's why I'm here, because I started working with Mike when he closed Linolite. And in fact, the day that the door was closed on Linolite for the very last time, Mike and myself were the very last two people out of the door. He locked the door and said, well, here we go. That's the last time we'll ever come out of that door.
I don't think any of us really thought that it would end. I think right up until the end, still don't think we thought it was going to happen. I remember being called in and they told me, not just me, but everybody, that we'd been made redundant. It was hard to grasp. I don't think really we'd thought it would happen. It was a very sad time because we were one big happy family. Probably a cliche to say it, but we were. Everybody knew everybody. Yeah, it was very sad. We had a big party when we were all finished up at Tetbury Hill, and I went round taking photographs of all the empty rooms, all the factory rooms, all of the empty rooms. It was very sad because I remember I had a very sparkly jumper on. In fact, I've still got it.
One big happy family. That came up so often in the 6 months that I was recording people's memories. The family atmosphere, the community atmosphere, the fact that many of the people worked there were actually families. I mean, people worked there through several generations of families as well and were related to each other. But the whole thing, I think, during the Linolite years and the Rotaflex years, really genuinely was a family feeling. So here's a photograph taken, I think, just before the closure in 1993. Some of the people have been mentioned, and you've heard their voices here. That's Mike White on the left here. This is, I don't know her name, it's a blind lady who worked there for many, many years. John Summers, Trevor Hicks, Malcolm Sparrowhawk, Rod Hodges, Dick Stanger, I think that's Gary Warner, Brian Dyke up here, and one or two other people that I haven't been able to include. So that was the family, as it were, at the end. And I think it's appropriate, I ended the book with the voice of John Summers, and I think it's appropriate to end with his voice here today.
Like all companies, it's the people that made Linolite. The buildings are just the buildings, and the products are the products. It's the people that are important. And there's some that I shall always remember. Unfortunately, quite a few of them are now not with us. Don Jobbins being number one, who was a brilliant engineer and a fantastic friend. Peter Sear, MD and a real gentleman. Brian Higgs, who gave me my start at Linolite, and a real character. Ross, Brian Dyke, Trevor, Martin, Mike, they all know who they are. There's probably others I should mention. Yeah, the people made it.
So just as a reminder of the voices that you've heard, and they are only extracts from the full stories which are in the Voices collection in the museum. And so thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Bill. That was fascinating, actually. Would any of our people watching like to ask any questions? You may unmute yourself if you'd like to.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Anybody like to ask a question? I suspect you've covered everything so well, Bill, that everyone's had all their questions answered already.
I'm just going to take my background off so it's a little bit less distracting, but maybe I'm a little bit clearer there.
Certainly your talk was, as I say, fascinating and very well put together for everybody to follow. And it really must have evoked the spirit and the company philosophy that obviously pervaded the whole place, well, both places down at Bernaville and up at Tetbury Hill.
Yeah.
it must have taken quite a long time to put it all together. You say 6 months to record the voices.
It was essentially 6 months to record and then do the editing, and of course get agreement from everybody who'd contributed, and then put the book together. But I did want it completed in a short time frame, because once I'd started, I didn't want people to feel that that nothing was happening.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't. It took a lot of time and effort, but it wasn't a chore, I'm sure, because you obviously enjoyed it.
It was so interesting, and I have to say I was welcomed so warmly into people's homes and told their personal stories, as you've seen. It's a real privilege. It really is.
Yeah. So you may not have been quite part of the family, but you would have been pretty close to it.
I almost felt it in the end. I was in the end. Yes. Yes.
Good.
Right. Just looking through to see if anybody has any questions. Nobody has unmuted themselves, or
no?
Okay.
Well, perhaps if they do unmute themselves, we can express our gratitude in the usual way by a round of applause for Bill. That's great.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about the dog.
Great job, thank you.
I enjoyed it too.
Can I say something?
Hello. Sounds like Janet.
Yeah, I just want to say, Bill, I'm not really interested in factories and things. And I'm such
especially now, Bill.
I want to long to listen to this, but it's absolutely fascinating. Yeah. And I think you should do it again in the Julia and Hans Rousing building, so that we can see the pictures bigger, because we look at this on a phone and it was really hard. But it was very enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Bill, if I could make a comment. Fascinating to look back on manufacturing industry, where I did spend most, if not all of my working life, brief as it might have been, but how it was so self-contained. There weren't the subcontractors doing the moldings or the metalwork. It was all done in-house, and that's how it was.
Yes.
Well, I went into industry.
It is how it was, though later on, when the mouldings became very complex, like for the Giottos, for example, they were bought in.
Yeah, but a different time, different world.
Yeah, very interesting.
Great. And silence. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.